Hello everyone and welcome to my session on managing Power BI workspaces. Welcome to the conference and I hope you have a great time. So my name is Ásgeir Gunnarsson. I'm from Iceland originally but living in Denmark now where I run my own consultancy called North Insights. Been in the BI business for a long time and then also a co-author of the Pro Microsoft Power BI administration book for my press with my good friend Michael Johnson, which is also a data platform MVP like myself. You have my contact information on the screen now if you want to get in touch, if you have any questions about the course or if you just want to hook up. So the agenda for today is that we're going to talk about managing workspaces. So I'm split it up into two things: creating workspaces, managing workspaces, and then we have time for questions at the end. So the first topic we are going to delve into is creating workspaces. Now, there are a few ways you can create workspaces in Power BI, and I have decided to, not really go into the method, but more about the way you, as an organization, handle that. So I've categorized them into three different categories. So a manual, where the user will create their own workspaces; a managed, where an admin or power users or someone that has a restricted number of people have the rights to create workspaces and they will create them for the users; or automatic, where there's some kind of a workflow in place that will create the workspaces automatically, either with or without an approval. So if you talk about manual way of creating workspaces, it's basically saying to the users, go on, you can create your own workspaces. You have the user rights to create workspaces, and you can do as you feel the need for it. Now there are pros and cons about this particular method. This is something that I see very often in organization, at least in the beginning, and maybe depending on their size, because this is the ultimate self-service way of doing Power BI. Here you just put it on the end users to make sure that they do things right. So the pros are, of course, it's very, very simple for the end user, because the end user can just do things by themselves. They don't need to ask for any form of help, and they just go in and then do it themselves. It's very unobtrusive because, again, they have their destiny in their own hands. They don't have to ask anyone for help, which can sometimes be a hindrance in a self-service environment. And of course, the user knows best what they want. Now, this is of course a bit of a loaded sentence, because they might not necessarily know how to do things the right way, but they know what they need. So that's why it's very often a good idea that they can just do it themselves. Now, the cons or the drawbacks of this free environment is that there is this risk of workspace proliferation. So I know many of you will probably remember the term Excel hell, where you talked about there was Excel files all over the place. Now this can easily happen also with Power BI. If things can spiral out of control, you can have thousands or hundreds or in tens of thousands of workspaces, where some of them are used, some of them are not used, and some of them are created the right way, some are created the wrong way, and nobody knows really how things stand or who did what. And this can be a bad thing, Again, so this is always the balance that you need to work with, of what is, how much self-service do you want, and how much control do you want. Now, as I said before, even though the user knows best what they want, they might not necessarily know how to create workspaces in the right way. If you have a naming convention, you need to communicate that very well to the users if you are allowed to allow them to do this themselves, because otherwise they will just try to pick their own name. And then there's also settings. There's a bunch of settings in the workspaces when you create them that you can set, and the user might not necessarily know how to do those correctly. Again, this is the balance of control and self-service. You can make this work really, really well as long as you make sure that your users know how to do things. So having a proper governance documentation in place, having a proper training of the users, this can actually work really, really well, this method here. But you need to balance those things to make sure that you're getting things the right way and it doesn't spiral out of control. The next category is managed. And in this case, the organization has decided that not everyone can create their own workspaces, but there's a central group of people that are allowed to do it. Those can be admins, power users, can be whatever, but it's not everyone. There's always a central group, and the end users need to ask those people for new workspaces. Now, this method has some pros and it has some cons, like all the different methods. For example, one of the pros is that it's a fairly simple process to set up. You decide who are allowed, and you tell all the users they need to ask them for it. So it's a very simple process. It doesn't take a long time to create, and you can in Power BI you can go in and you can say in the admin portal, you can go into the tenant settings, and you can go underneath workspace settings. You can say that who is able to create workspaces. In this tenant, everyone is enabled to create workspaces, but you can just switch it over to a specific security group, and now these people are the only ones that are allowed to create workspaces. So it's simple to create, simple to set up. Of course, workspaces are also then created by trusted parties, or people who actually know best practices. Again, of course, you need to educate those people in how to do things in the best way. So, you cannot just pick people and, expect them to do things right. You need to tell them how to do things right. But it's much easier to train few people than it is to train everyone on how to do things correctly. So you will get the simple setup, and you will get, a fairly good governance control, because you know that people who are creating the workspaces, they are trained and they know what they're doing. Now, the cons is, of course, that there might be a possibly significant delay for the end user. So the end user has created a report, they need to share it with their boss or someone, and they need the workspace for it, and they ask this person for a new workspace. And of course, if you have a dedicated person waiting for a request to come in to create workspaces, this might not be a significant delay, but normally these people are also doing other things, and they might get a lot of requests, and this might actually cause them to cause this thing to go slowly. And if you can complicate this process even more by saying that yes, there is only a few people who are allowed to do it, but they need to get approval from the user's manager or something like that, and that even makes the delay even bigger. And of course, the needs might be wrongly interpreted. Remember, in the in the category before, I said the user knows best what they need, but communicating those needs over to another person might actually be difficult, or things might be lost in translation. Meaning that there might be iterations to be made, because you do things. The people who are creating workspaces do things that are not in the way that the end user hoped or intended. So this is like the middle ground in my mind. So you have governance control in place. You know what's being done. You know how it's being done. But there is a trade-off in the self-service, because you are delaying people unless you put a lot of resources on this. But most likely you're at least delaying them for some time. So choosing this method, I see a lot of organizations choosing this method because it's very simple to create, but it's also good control, and they accept that there is a trade-off in time and interpretation of the needs themselves. And another thing, when you have it managed, another thing you can actually do, which is a really good thing in my mind at least, is that when you create a workspace in this kind of a managed way, you can decide to, for example, put a group of support people in as admins of the group, or at least as contributors or members, because then they can go in and help if there is any need for support. If there is any need for support, and the support people are not a part of the workspace, they need administrator help to get that access, either from the owner of the workspace, or the admin of the actual workspace, or the admin of Power BI, which can add them to the workspace afterward. So by doing it up front, you're actually making the support process much smoother, if that's what you want. I really like that approach, and I think that it's something that works well in the cases that I have seen. So the third and final way of creating workspaces is what I like to group into one group called automatic. So in this kind of scenario, you are trying to automate the process, or you're removing that group of people who are allowed to manually approve or create workspaces, but instead you're creating a workflow that does a lot of the work for you. And the good thing about it, or one of the pro about doing it this way, is that you get it very consistent, because there's a machine doing it, so it's going to be very consistent. It's always going to be done in the same way, and if you set it up correctly, it's always going to be set up correctly. It's fast, although we can, of course, we need to keep in mind that if we decide we want to have our approval, which I normally recommend, then of course the approval will be the bottleneck in this process here. The con is that this is of course more effort to set up this process than it is just to have a person or persons who are taking care of creating workspaces. You need to create that workflow, you need to create all the components, you need to test it properly, and you need to maintain it. And so if you include the approval, as I said before, you might still cause that delay or even significant delay. But if you need approval anyway, it's still gonna be faster than the managed way, because you're gonna skip the human part, which is not the approval. So this is something that I think is a really valuable way of doing things, and it has a lot of pros, and the cons are something that I think is manageable in most cases. But again, this is the balance. Remember, we have the complete self-service. People do whatever they want. We have more control in the managed part, and here we have similar amount of control but more speed. I would say the most control you have, of course, in the managed, because there's a person taking a decision each and every time about all these different things, and you can do things more customized. While this one is more consistent, but there is of course no human hand on most of it. The way I see this kind of automated process is that you will have some kind of a form that the user will fill out. When the user has filled out the form, a workflow is initiated. That workflow will, in most cases, it will write at least some kind of a record of what's going on. And then it will ask for approval if that's relevant. And it could be, more than one person. It doesn't have to be just one. And then, if the approval is given, it will create the workspaces with the right settings. So if we dive a little bit deeper into it, we have, when the user needs to fill out a form, because this is basically the same thing as when a user asks an administrator to in the managed process. So someone needs to tell the system what does need to be created. By having a proper form, you will actually have that consistency that you need, because you will have fields that you require to be filled out. And you will then add the information that needs before you create the workspace. And this can be whatever type of form that allows you to start a workflow. So there's many if you want to stick to the Power Platform, because we are talking about Power BI here, you could use Power Apps, but you could also use Microsoft Forms, and you can use Google Forms, or you can do whatever forms you think are that a workflow can grab the content of. That's the main thing here. So when the user has filled out the form, the workflow is set in motion. And again, this can be whatever workflow engine that you want to use. Here I'm using, has to have the Power Automate logo on it, because again, we are in the Power Platform. But it could also be Azure Logic Apps, which is the parent of Power Automate, or it could be any kind of other workflow machine that you have. If you have a workflow software set up already, and you have knowledge of that, you can use that. It doesn't have to be anything within the Power Platform. The good thing about using the Power Platform or Power Automate in this case, it's because it's rather tightly knit to the Office environment, and including Power BI. So some of the things you will get out of the box. If you want, you can have approval. I recommend that you have approval, but of course that depends a little bit on how tight the process you want to do. And that approval can be different kind of approval. For example, some require approval from the manager of the person requesting it, but that doesn't always have to be something that makes sense. Maybe it should be approval from the Power BI governance responsible or Power BI administrator, someone who reads what you want to have created and make sure that this confirms to whatever your governance strategy is. or it could be some kind of a data stewards, or all kind of different approvals depending on just what you are creating and what your process is. And that approval should be something that can be done in as automated way as possible. So for example, if you're using Power Automate, it has approval engine which sends an email, person press approve or not approved, and then writes a message if they want, and then it will just happens. So that's something that can be highly recommended. You don't want it to be that someone needs to send an email and someone needs to read the email and then restart the workflow. It should be an automated workflow. And then when the approval is there, you will create the workspaces with whatever settings you deem right for your organization. And it could be different settings depending on what people have filled out in the user form in the beginning. So you could allow should it be set as a premium workspace, or should it be a OneDrive OneDrive folder put onto the workspace? There are all kinds of different settings you can do, but you want to have it set so that that it is it's as automated as possible. So why do we think this is a good way of doing things? Why it has this good way to use an automated process? For first, I say it will be faster, but it also has traceability, and it's very easy to know what has been done and what has not been done. And you can, let's say, standardize that user form and the whatever happens afterwards to such a degree that it's going to be very consistent and a very good high quality of workspaces when you create them. Now remember, of course, that you might need to reiterate this a few times, so it's not sure that you will get this right straight away. So make sure that you have some kind of a leverage to iterate a couple of times to get this absolutely correct. So how might such a workflow look? So let me show you. I have created a workflow, a demo workflow using the Power Platform, just to show you what this might look like and how I went out, what I went about doing it. So I'm just gonna switch over to my browser. So first, I'm just gonna show you the form. I'm gonna fill it out, and I'm gonna fire it off, and then we're gonna look at how I built it. So I'm just gonna run the form here. So this is a very simple form. So I have just decided to keep it very simple for this demo. But whatever you put in the screen should be, this screen should capture all the requirements that you have towards your workspace. So it should not be, you don't want to have people, doing multiple forms. So coming back to them and asking them again. So try to capture everything you can. But I'm just gonna do one here. I'm very original in my name. So in this case, we ask for business purpose, and this is to make the approval more easy. If you just ask for a new workspace and what settings should be set, it's very hard for the approvers to understand what are we trying to solve here, and why is this an important thing. So that's why I think it's a good idea to ask for business purpose. So world would end without it, just for fun. So in my case here, I also have a workspace owner. It might be the person asking for it. So this picks up my name because I'm the one who is running it. But it also asks for who's responsible. In this case, it might be the manager, or it might be the department lead, or it might be the same person. But at least there's a possibility here to say that there's a different person that is responsible for it. So this Ásgeir is owner, and this Ásgeir is responsible. Now let's do it something different, so it's more fun. So, and in this case, I'm also asking what time does the workspace need to be done. So this is important, of course. If you if you have an approval process, you want to give people some kind of a time. You cannot say this will be done tomorrow. So this one here automates it to a week 4 days in the future. This is recorded on September 30th, and it looks on the 3rd of October, saying that's where But you can go in here and you can change it. But I've decided just to stick to this because it's just a demo. So then I will submit the request, and it just says, thanks for submitting the request for new workspace. Your workspace will be sent for approval. You will be notified of the results by approval email when it's done. Okay, I'm getting some kind of an error here, but I'm gonna ignore it for now. I'm having some kind of issues logging into Power Apps for the moment, so that's why the error was. But it doesn't really matter. It was just showing the form. So how did I create this, and how could you create all of this? So I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna edit this form. I created a Power Apps Canvas app. Very simple. There's nothing really hocus pocus about this app. I just added some text fields here, so I can go and get some text. The only thing maybe that's not really out of the box is those those fields here, which are using the Azure AD connector. The Azure AD connector is not standard. It is standard, but you need to add it, and it requires a license. So you need to think about if that makes sense for you, because if you use this connector, you will need to license this app for everyone that uses it. Now, if you're on a large organization and you want everyone to use this, that might be a bad idea. If you use any of the data sources that are Office data sources, so SharePoint or Excel or all these things, it will most often fit within your Office license. But as soon as you start using other kind of data sources, this might actually cost you some money. But otherwise than that, I'm just set a very simple form that one date picker, two calls to my Azure AD, and then two text fields. One with multiple lines and one with one line. Very, very, very simple here. And I had two screens, and one of the other screen is simply just the thank you screen. After you press the submit button, it will take you here. Otherwise than that, this is just a very, very simple app. The real magic, or the real things that happen actually in Power Automate, because that's where the workflow is. So of course the app captures the information, but the Power Automate part will actually do the workflow and run it. So let's take a look at that. So I have when I created my workflow, I made it sure that it was connected to this button. You can see this button here, it calls for that workflow. So if I go to Actions, you can see there's a Power Automate button here in Power Apps. And it says that the request for Power BI Workspace is associated with this button here. So I can go now here and I can say Edit. And now it will open Power Automate, and it will go to my Power App and show me that app that I'm going to be using. So I'm going to go through that app and tell you how I created it. It's just so we understand what can and cannot be done in this. As this is an app, this is a workflow that is initiated from Power Apps. The first task is always just Power Apps, so you cannot do anything about this. This is just this one will be initiated from Power Apps. It also makes, because we have this one here set, it also makes that we will see it here when we want to add workflows to our buttons. All the workflows that have this Power Apps in the beginning, they can be added. So what we do here is, in this workflow, is that we decided we want to create this item into a SharePoint list, because we want to keep track of what has been done and what is going to happen. So we first create it, and we get the information from Power Apps. So what is the title? In this case, the title is the requester. And what is the name that the person asked for the workspace? Who is the owner? Who is the responsible? What is the business case? Approved, of course, is not something that we can fill out now because this has not been approved. Then what time does it need to be done? What is the status? And you can because Power Automate actually can communicate with SharePoint. It can just tell me what the options are. And now it's just been created. And then what time did that actually happen? So we have now. So this is a list that I created in SharePoint that I just fill out when a request comes in, just so that we understand that there is a request that is coming. Now then we start with the approval process. If you did not have an approval process, you could simply have, after the create item, you could just say, create the workspace. That's it. Then you just have 3 steps in this, and it will be very, very simple. If you have an approval, then you complicate matters a little bit, but that's not too bad. The approval here is of the type approval. It is an object that is will exist within Power Automate or in the whole Microsoft Dataverse world. So I didn't have to create this, didn't have to figure out how this would work. This is simply a built-in component that will allow you to do an approval process. It simplifies it a lot because now you don't really have to send an email and then wait for the answer and try to grab the answer from a SharePoint list or something like that. This is all built into this component. It will wait, it will start the approval, and it will wait for an answer. And that answer could take days, but it will just wait until it will happen. So in this case, I have the approval is to approve or reject, first to respond. So you could have multiple people doing the approval, and you would only want one of them to respond. You can also change this to be everyone must approve, or you can have some custom responses as well. I just said, I want to have a 2-step process. So first I want to ask one person to, do you approve? And in this case, I just fill in the blanks basically. What is the title? So this is basically the subject, in the email. So request for new Power BI Workspace by, and then I will fetch the name of the person who is asking for it. Then I assign this to a static person. So this one will get the email. This of course could be fetched from somewhere. You could, for example, it's very technically possible and not very complicated within this approval workflow here to ask Active Directory who is the manager of the person asking. So without really knowing who is asking, you can get as long of course as that structure is set up in Active Directory or Office, you can go on and you can ask, who is the manager of this person, and I'm going to send the email to them to ask for their approval. I just did it simply because I haven't really, in my small AD, I have not set this up. So I just have a fixed person who is going to be asked for the approval here. Then I write the details, and this is of course this free text plus whatever objects you have fed. So I'm taking it from the SharePoint list. I could have just taken it from Power Apps straight away, but I'm just taking it from SharePoint list because I've already written it down to there. So I just pick it up and I put all these different fields within my free text. I could have a link here as well. I could, for example, allow the people to put a link, for example, for the SharePoint list. So if there were any additional details that I couldn't put into the email that I wanted people to click on, this could be a case system. If you want to write this to a case system, it could be all kind of different things that you could do with this. And then you could link to it. People can then go in and look for it, the approver, and they can read all the details and then come back to their email and say yes or no. I've decided not to do it because I can fit all the small amount of information within in a reasonable email here. Then when this gets fired, it sends the email to this particular email, and then it waits for the approval before it continues. And in our case, we're gonna say if when there comes a response to this, we're gonna apply the rest of it to each one of these responses. So in this case, we only have one person responding. So this it doesn't really change a lot that it is applied to each. But if you had multiple responses, this would go through all of them and then apply to whatever to it. So I say that for all the responses that come back, which is only one in this case, I'm going to have first a condition saying did you approve it? So there are two ways you can they can be approved and not approved. So I check if the response or the approver's response is equal to the word approve. If that is, then we go to the yes. If it's not, we go to the no. Let's start with the no. If the person who did not approve it, if they say no, we will update the SharePoint list saying that this is not approved and what the reason is, and then we will send an email to the person who who sent the request in saying, we are sorry, but your request has been declined. Here you could actually have the third option. It is you might want to say here, if the person who rejects it, if they reject it, they could somehow say that we don't reject it outright, but we request more information, or we need more for this to be approved. So either way, will work. You might, in this case, I'm just rejecting it, sending an email saying it's rejected because of this, and that might be because it's not enough information, and then you need to apply again. So a little bit of double effort for the end user, and you might want to not do that, but it depends. So if they say yes, so if the approver said yes, it is approved, I do another approval. So in this case, I'm sending the email to a different person, and I'm doing it a little bit differently. I'm doing most of it the same way. I just I just add a little bit of a different text. So in this, in the above approval, I said if you approve, it's going to go to this person for approval. And here I'm saying if you approve, it's going to be created with this information. But otherwise than that, it's the same. So when this person has approved it, then we go into another one where I say, okay, is it approved or not? If no, I'm going to send the email. I'm not, so I missed here. I should have updated the item as well, but small problems. If they say yes, first of all, I will update the SharePoint list as that I missed over here to say that now this has been approved and who approved it. So we have here an HTTP component that will call the Power BI REST API to actually create the workspace. So it'll be a little bit, you need to, have a little bit of, figure out these different things, but it's not overly complicated. We are using a post command here. We are using the API endpoint which creates workspaces. This is all can be found in the documentation for the REST API. We're using one header, content type, application JSON. If you go to the Power BI REST API documentation, find this particular endpoint and click on try it, you will actually see what you need to fill in. Then I have a body here saying that I want the name to be the suggesting name, so the name that the person wanted it to be. Below here we have then how do you want to authenticate you, and I'm running this under a service principal. So I have using Active Directory authentication, OAuth authentication, where I need to supply my tenant ID, my audience, my client ID, credentials, secret, and all that. You cannot see the details, but this is what I have here. So when this flow is run, the workspace is going to be created using this code here. And then when the workspace is created, we go on and we send an email to the person who requested it, saying, hey, your workspace has now been, your workspace request has been approved. Your workspace has been created. Go and then you can check it out. If it's not there right away, just give it a few moments and then it's going to be there. So this is it. This is a process. I know it maybe looks a little bit complicated, but this is something that took me a couple of hours to set up. And of course, like I say, you could do it more foolproof, as I have said. It could take a little bit more. But if you consider how much time a managed process would take, spending a day or two on making this good is not that much waste of time, because it will save you a lot of time in the end, and will have all the consistency that you need. So. Hope that it gave you a little bit of insight of how it could be. Of course, like I said, this is not the only way this can be done. There are plenty of other ways you can do workflows like this, and plenty of other types of software you can do this. Power Automation is just very simple and easy to use because it doesn't really require a lot of coding. It's just fairly simple. Okay, so that was the automated process. Now let's look at how it will work, how it will look for the approvers. So if you're an approver, you get sent an email. So the first approver gets sent an email first, and then the flow will wait while that person does its approval, and then it will send on to the next one. So So you can see in this case, the approver has gotten an email, and that email says, hey, you can approve this or you cannot approve it. So you can see the body of the email is basically what I put into the body or in my flow. So it has the name of the email of the requester, name of the workspace that they want, who is the owner, who is the responsible, and what is the business case, and so on and so forth. If I then as an approver can I press a reject or approve, and if I press approve, I have some comments I can put in, and then I can submit it. And the same thing would happen if I press reject, then I will just get the possibility to put in comment, and then I can submit it. So let's say looks good, and then I'm gonna submit this. Now when this goes back to the approval engine, it will say then, oh, hey, fine, we have an approval. Let's go on and continue with our workflow. And the workflow will then come in, and it will send an email to the next person in line. Let's see if that person has actually received the email or not. Yes, now they have actually received the email as well, saying here you need to approve this. So it just goes on in the chain. And if I now approve this, the Power BI Workspace will be created, and the owner, the requester, myself, will get an email saying this has been approved. So let's go on and say it looks good again, and submit this. And so now it's gone, and even Teams has saying hey you approved it, so it should all be good. Now let's go back here. And then we can see that in our Power Automate, let's go back here. You can see that it is succeeded. Now it's done running. So that's good. If we then go back to Power BI, we can now go and we can see the workspace. We cannot see it maybe in the list now, but let's just do a refresh here. And then we should see our new Power BI Workspace. So new Power BI Workspace is now created, and it's here for us. Now again, you could make this this workflow a little bit more advanced by now. When you create the workspace, you added those support people as admins or as members to the workspace, so that it can be even more robust, the whole process. But this was the automated process, and I hope it made sense to you that we have all these different steps and what it can do for you. In my mind, this is the best way to handle creating workspaces if you want and need some more control than to just let people go wild and do the proper self-service. If you want to have some kind of a control, which I highly recommend, at least some kind of a governance flow in it, then this is the method that I recommend, instead of having just a group of people doing it, because you always risk some inconsistency in that and that human bottleneck. So now let's talk about managing workspaces. So we talked about creating them. Now let's talk about managing already existing workspaces. But there are many things, so there's a lot of gray areas around managing workspaces. Should it be the administrator or is it the developer? What is the responsibility of each? So I'm going to try to define it a little bit what it is when we talk about management. And I have really 3 boxes that I have decided to put it into. So first box is access control. There needs to be some kind of access control. There is implicitly an access control in Power BI. And you as a workspace admin or as an administrator that are managing workspaces, if you are in the managed part, or if you're in the automated part, or no matter where you are, you need to some kind of manage that. The access to workspaces is very often handled by the developer, but sometimes it's handled by by administrators, depending a little bit on how strict security you have. Of course, implicitly with workspaces comes all the content in the workspace, so apps and reports and datasets and all those different things. So, but generally speaking, a lot of that is in the hands of the developer. Then there's content management. So, how, artifact creation, deletion, all those things, works with apps and reports and data sets and all this. So content lifecycle management. That is most often in the hands of the developer, but sometimes part of it will fall into the hands of the administrator. And of course, in the end, the workspace lifecycle management, that is, you create a workspace. We talked about that before. We used an automated process or a managed process or a self-service process. The same thing can happen about, you can apply the same thing to the sunset or the deletion of a workspace, because you don't necessarily want workspaces to live forever. You want to probably make sure that when a workspace is not longer in use, you want to get rid of it, because otherwise you would get that proliferation of workspaces. Right? But also regarding workspace lifecycle management, it's the question about multiple environments. So Power BI doesn't have an environment. So usually you will talk about a workspace as an environment. No matter if you're using your own methods of multiple environments in Power BI or using the deployment pipelines, each time a environment is a workspace. And if you're using the managed or the automated way of creating workspaces, this is something that you need to be aware of and you need to think about. So if you sometimes require multiple environments and sometimes not, then you need to include that in your form where people fill out if they need multiple environment or not. So this was a little bit about definition. So managing workspaces, as I say, there are 3 different ways you can manage workspaces in Power BI, and it's a very similar thing as I talked about when I talked about creating. So first of all, you can let users do it. So user manages their own workspace. They manage it from A to Z. They create content, they delete content, they give access, they do everything in their own. So this is the self-service part. But this can also work within the managed user workspace creation model. Because in many cases, and I see this often in many organizations, even though the creation of workspaces is managed, the management of the workspace is in the hands of the end users. You can also have the middle ground, which or the other, totally on the other end, where you say admins, they create workspaces, or power users, and they also manage them. So the end user does not have access to do anything else than create content, but giving access and do all the things that needs to be done in managing the workspace, it's done by admins. And then you have the hybrid, which is probably one I see very often in larger organizations, where you have some kind of a managed process to create the workspaces, and then the admins have some kind of a responsibility, or admins or power users, some kind of responsibility to manage a part of the workspace, or even just co-manage everything together with the users. So the admins or the power users make sure that everything is done correctly, but the end users are normally the ones that are actually doing what needs to be done. So they're giving access and everything. But there are processes that the admins will do. For example, there are going to be monitoring of workspaces, and in if something comes up, workspaces is not being used at all, or there is some kind of a breach, or there's some kind of a some settings that are not correct, then the admins will step in and they will help the end user do it. So what are the pros and cons of these different methods? So if we talk first about user managing it on, that's probably the most common way. It's fast and it's simple and it's unobtrusive. Nobody else to ask. You just do whatever you want with your own workspace. So the con of it is a little bit, there's a lack of oversight. So administrators don't necessarily know what's going on. They don't have that oversight of what's happening with each workspace. The user might also lack the knowledge of best practices. They might think, okay, I need to give someone access to my report, so I will just give the member access to my workspace, meaning that everyone that get access, they will both need a license and they might even delete everything. And it can make support more difficult because support doesn't have access and they don't have any way to get to it unless they go through an administrator first, or the end user needs to know how to give them access. So this is a typical scenario that I see in many organizations. It works really well until something goes wrong, and that's something that you need to bear in mind. So if you're really looking for self-service, this is a great way of doing it. just be sure, just know that if things go wrong, it's gonna be harder to make them right again because of this lack of access and oversight. Now, admins manage all workspace. Now, I'm going to start on the right here. It's because there's a level. If admin is the only one that has the admin role, or the admin has all the contributing roles. So, for example, you might decide that the only admin in a workspace should be the administrator, but the end user can do they can do everything they want within except they cannot give other people access. So they can create and delete, and they can publish the app, and they can do everything they want. You can also say that I want the admin to be the admin and member, meaning that they can give other people access. The admin controls the access and the publishing of the app, but the user can publish from Power BI Desktop to the workspace, and they can delete, they can create content within the service and all that. So there's different levels you can decide this on. If you decide to go down one of these routes, so have the admin that have that role, and the normal user will have either just a view role or even not access at all. With it, the pros are you can really good control, and you get assurance for best practices. The cons is that it can mean, again, significant delays because you're waiting for someone else to do the work here. So if a user wants to publish a report, they need to somehow give it to the admin. Now, of course, if we are talking about a proper DevOps process where we are talking about a production workspace, that you don't want the end user to have access to it, but you want to have an automated process. This can be really, really helpful, and this probably is the way you want to go with many production workspaces, as long as there is a proper DevOps process. What you probably don't want to go down that route is that you have this as a manual process, because that can be mean a lot of delays and a lot of unhappy users. And again, it needs a clear communication, no matter if you're going to a DevOps process or you're going just with a manual process, because the end user needs to be able to tell the ones who are administrating the workspace when is content ready to go to production, or when is content ready to go to test or development, depending on how strict you are in all this. So great control, assurance of best practices, but you need to do this well so you don't sorry for the word, piss off your users, because it can mean a lot of delays. A hybrid model is something that I very often see. It has the same kind of levels, so you can have the same levels, except we have one other level where we can say that the administrator fully controls the production environment, but the user fully controls all the other workspaces. Or, as I often see it as well, the admin controls the admin level of all workspaces, and it controls all the other levels of the production. But for dev and test, the end user can do whatever they want except give other people access. They can create apps, and they can do everything. They just cannot give anyone access, and in the production they cannot do anything. So this one is fast and simple up until production level. And the administrators can monitor and intervene, they can help, and they can make sure things are done properly. And support, I suppose, is easier because the administrator has access, and assuming that the admin is the support person as well. If it's not, they can at least very easily know when things go, when people need help, and they can alert the support people and give them access. But it can mean a lot of work for admins. So that's why I'm saying, doing the automated DevOps process is probably the best thing you can do for your admins if you are in that situation that you want to be, have its control. And know that I'm not just meaning like Power BI administrator role people here. I'm meaning admins that are administrating workspaces. So this is not necessarily the only Power BI administrator you have in the organization. It might be but a lot of people have that kind of role, but they're in different parts of the organization. And of course, the other con about this is that when you allow the users to do whatever they want on lower levels, that means that that might be, and even on production, it means that you might be doing reactive best practices, so that you're reacting to people doing things wrong, and then you're going in and fixing it. But this model is probably the best of both worlds, where you are in a situation where you allow the users to have relative freedom on dev and maybe even test, but you control the production. Or you can control at least the access to everything, meaning that you have a very good way of helping them. So you're sacrificing a little bit of control to get a little bit of speed and more user satisfaction.